think today's will probably be a little bit shorter and like, kind of more like high level meta topics rather than like kind of deep, like real detail in the last couple ones. And so this one will probably be a little more history, and
Cool.
just help, like understand like just kind of like the world that we find ourselves in today, because it's really no different than like what humanity's going through right now is something that humanity goes through on a regular basis. It's about every 100 years humanity goes through one of these types of situations. And so that's what gives me confidence. Like when I look at like all the craziness in the world, I just remember that like anytime there's that like that like these generations kind of like you know come at like ebb and flow. Like there's always chaos, but then from the chaos, I think that brings about a lot of really good productive change for society. And I think that like this next, kind of as this like previous generation kind of comes to an end, and then like we're kicking off like a new generation. I think there's a lot of opportunity. Humanity is in a better position than it's ever been. More connectedness, more productivity, and I think that that's all the problems that we still see today that have their roots in like the last generation and even the one before. I think that like you know humanity does take time to learn from those things, and I think that this next 100 years, I think it's going to be the best one yet, and that's what we have to look forward to. But it's always important to look at like the history and like understand like what got us to today. Um, so I just sent the link out. Some other people will probably join us, but I'll go ahead and start sharing my screen right now, and then we can. I just wrote down some notes here, and then I'll be pulling stuff up on the browser. But yeah, I mean, like today when I posted about it, Stan he'd asked something about like will Bitcoin ever replace the U.S. dollar? And when I was thinking about that, I was just thinking that's like a really important question, and then also like part of like a broader discussion of like where Bitcoin's role in like geopolitics, because since money is really at the root of all society, and Bitcoin is this like emerging form of money, that puts Bitcoin really at like the heart of society, and it's really at a perfect time because previous forms of money have gotten humanity through the Stone Age, and then through the agricultural age, and then through the industrial age, and then now we're at a turning point where we're entering into the information age, and um, and that's the opportunity for the market to present new forms of money that help society organize and help society figure out what things to produce. And so and also just because of everything, kind of what we talked about last week about like just like the monetary chaos where like in response to global like health crisis, there's just been like unprecedented money printing in the US. And then there's been and especially with the issues around race and property rights, and law enforcement, the world is really questioning like what is the form of government and law enforcement, and how can like and it's really making people realize that nobody else is going to enforce your property rights other than yourself. And so I think that like it's like really in perfect time that Bitcoin has kind of had 10 years to kind of find its ground, right at the time when people are really asking, across all societies across the world, people are asking really really tough questions about like what is the role of government and what is the role of money. And so I think that like really like Bitcoin fits right into this, and so it's really really important to understand just kind of like that it's more than just like more than just like a thing on a chart. It's more than just like a magic internet money. It really has some qualities that enable it to really make big societal change. And so yeah, I mean that's kind of what we can start. And so the question like the probably the first thing to start off with is like to like really understand what it means to be a global reserve currency. So like right now, the U.S. dollar is considered the global reserve currency, and so uh, like I just was just reading on like kind of what the official definitions are, but it's really like a currency or an asset that nations all over the world will hold in either their treasury or at their central bank. And so like nations all over the world, like they may have their own local domestic currency, but typically in their central banks, or at their government's treasury, they're holding U.S. dollars. Also countries hold euros, and then also within this category of reserve assets, they might hold gold, they might hold oil, they might hold other commodities, real estate, just various different forms of assets that governments hold. And the reason why they hold these assets is to help give them leverage so that they can assert monetary policy. So, like when, a nation is in like a tough situation and they need to print money, they can leverage their national assets in order to, print the money and deliver it to their society, and it helps them fight against inflation, because that's like anytime a domestic currency is faced with inflation, it's taking money away from everybody who holds that currency. And so if governments want to keep peace and order, that they really need to keep that under control. And so that's why governments accumulate assets so that they can be more flexible with their monetary policy. Because if they had no assets on reserve and they were trying to just like print a bunch of money to like fund whatever thing that they're trying to do, that would quickly result in inflation, and that would be it would introduce chaos in their society, and the government would lose like the good faith of their citizens. And so reserve assets are like what makes a government a government. It's like it's like their bank account. And so right now that most governments hold US dollars, and part of that is because a lot of critical commodities are only priced in dollars. Like when you look at OPEC, it's called the oil producing, what is it? Organization of the Petroleum Exporting Countries. It's pretty much a global agreement amongst major nations in the world, and it requires that all oil trading is priced in dollars. So what that means is that in order for a country to import oil, they must first accumulate dollars. And so this is something that like creates a lot of demand for dollars, and helps like the U.S. assert its status as being the world reserve currency. Is that oil, which is something that all societies need to like power their country and like create industries, they're forced to accumulate dollars in order to purchase oil. And so that's like one of the factors that helps maintain the US's reserve currency status. And then also, I mean, the strength of the US military, throughout history, times where people have tried to introduce new currencies, especially ones that compete with the monopoly on how oil is produced, the U.S. military will just have them whacked. So an example of this this really opened my mind was Muammar Gaddafi. He was the prime minister of Libya, and he was trying to introduce a new type of currency called the golden dinar. And so when we look up, golden dinar, Gaddafi, we'll see that he was trying to create a currency for Africa and the Middle East that was backed by oil, gold, other precious gems and other commodities that are common in these areas. And they were going to start pricing their oil in dinar. And so that was a major threat to the United States dollar's status as reserve currency. And so Hillary Clinton, who was the Secretary of State, had this guy killed in 2011. And there's a famous video of Hillary Clinton saying, we came, we saw, he died. And this is, like,
so, I mean, that is the land of unconfirmed.
Yes, we came, we saw, he died.
Did it have anything to do with your visit?
No, oh, I'm sure it did.
See, and like, so that's wars throughout history have been fought over money and like, what is the reserve money? And, in this case, Hillary Clinton was kind of joking about it, but that's, that's the extent that nations will go through in order to assert their reserve currency status. And this was in 2011. Like, this isn't even like, something that, it happened so long ago. This was, less than 10 years ago. Muammar Gaddafi was trying to introduce this new form of currency to empower Middle Eastern and African oil producing nations. And, so the response to that is, they'll go and they'll just have these people whacked. And so, that's like it's a high stakes game. But it's been happening since the beginning of history. It started, I looked we've talked about before the Roman denarius, how it, for hundreds of years, this was the reserve currency. But even before, so I looked more into the history, and it's gone from the Athenian drachma to the Roman denarius, to the Byzantine solidus, to the Arabian dinar, to the Florentian fiorino, to the Portuguese dinero, to the Spanish real, to the Dutch guilder, to the French livre tournois, to the British pound, to the US dollar, and then to the US Federal Reserve note. And, maybe the next one is Bitcoin. It could have been the, Gaddafi's golden dinar, but, when he was killed, that really, he was really like a strong leader in that region. And, they took him out, and, that was that. And so the US dollar continues to be the global reserve currency. But, Bitcoin, especially over the last 3 years, has really emerged as a potential next currency to, kind of, take some of that status, because, they change, all the time. So like when we look at the history of world reserve currencies, they kind of go in these, it just passes from one to the other. And so these are about, this one says 80 years, 110 years, 80 years, 95 years, 105 years, 110 years. And I think now it's been about like 90 years for the US dollar. And so it's been 110 years for the US dollar. And that's pretty well in line. Like it's part of these generational cycles, because as nations build up their reserve currency status, it usually, part of that is credit expansion, where because they feel so strong about their, their currency, they will start issuing credit, and they'll start, expanding the monetary base. And then when it expands too far, there's usually a major contraction. And then in that contraction, there's a lot of chaos. And usually that's when like world powers start to shift. Because like you can't take over, like the reserve currency status when the nation who issues it is at like their all-time highs. But when they're struggling, like that's when these big power shifts happen. And they happen on these like generational bases too. Like the average, span of the reserve currency since the 1500s has been, under 100 years. And that's, human life expectancy is, around 75 years. But it's like, pretty close to, that like generational cycle where, an entire like generation of people will live and die during, within one currency being the reserve. And then, it can kind of transition out of that. And so, that's where, we find ourselves today. And it's important to, really understand the different forms of money that are presenting themselves in the market. Because like it's, I think it can be, what's the word I'm looking for? It can be naive to think that like things are just going to stay how they are. Especially now, like, we're seeing so much change in the world, and like, vast, technological improvements, vast like communication improvements where like, it used to take, weeks to months for information to get from one side of the world to the other. But now that information can move at the speed of light. And so things just will change a lot faster. And things that used to take like a long period of time to unfold, they can just happen on a lot quicker time scale. And we're already seeing it. And it really like, these transitions to new forms of reserve currency, they're very tightly coupled with like the nations who issue them, just expanding the monetary supply too much. And so a good example of that is if we look at on this chart, it shows it's titled "Fineness of Early Roman Imperial Silver Coins." And so this is like the silver content of these coins. And so early on in, in Rome's history, their coin was almost 100% silver. But then by the time the year 250 AD, that was down below, in the like around 35%. And so early on, when like the reason why Rome had such a vast, expansive empire was because they had major innovations in plumbing, like their aqueducts that are still, I saw them last year. I was in Italy. Their aqueducts, which still stand today, that enabled their society to thrive. Literally, they had plumbing, running water, sewage, and the reason why they were able to, maintain that is because the Roman centurion, their military, which was the strongest military in the world, they were getting paid in silver in the silver coins. But then, and so anytime there'd be an issue with the, with their aqueducts that they needed to send the centurion to go and like take care of, so like when the Vandals would come and like, try to take over some region, and they would, first thing they'd do is cut off the water supply. They like the centurion were very motivated to go out there because they were getting paid well. Like, they were, part of the elite of society. But then over time, just as the silver content in their coins started moving, away from being 100% silver to being, silver and pewter, and then pewter and silver, they were just less motivated to go and, go and maintain, the aqueducts in these like, expansive parts of their empire. And so like that's, when people say that like the US dollar is backed by the military, it's really the military is backed by the US dollar. And it's only to the extent that there is enough demand for the thing that the US government pays to the military. So right now, like, and in the past, few decades, there's been high demand for US dollars. And so the US military is, willing to go and fight wars. Early on it was, to fight, Hitler, it was to fight, like vast destruction and, genocide. And then, the wars over the last couple decades have been more around commodities. They've been around oil. A lot of it has to do with OPEC. Notice it started in 1960, and since 1960, like except for the Vietnam War, like all the major wars have been centered around oil. And that's because oil is such a central part of maintaining the demand for US dollars and asserting US dollars as the reserve currency. And so, they send, the troops out to go and, change the political structure in these nations to be beneficial for, the oil markets. And so like, and then that happens because the soldiers they're happy to get paid in dollars. But if the trend continues and the demand for things like Bitcoin that can't be printed by a government to go and fund a war, if the demand for that continues to exceed the demand for dollars, there may be a point where the soldiers just won't show up. They're like, just like the Roman dinar or the Roman centurion, one day they just stopped showing up because what they were getting paid in was worthless compared to other forms of money. They just stopped showing up to protect the national assets, and that's what led to the collapse of Rome. And that may be what spurs along the change in what the reserve currency is if if the people, if the military that's backed by the dollar, if they're no longer willing to accept the dollar, and they demand Bitcoin, and the government can't print Bitcoin, they have to buy, accumulate it from the market. That really changes the like the order in the world. And so the US dollar has been the reserve currency since the since the early 20th century. But that is left to be seen. What happens. And Stan, who I think is still on here, he kind of kicked off this train of thought with this question, really about like, will Bitcoin replace the US dollar? It may not replace the US dollar. Like, dollars are really good for spending, like for its use as currency. Like, dollars outperform Bitcoin because you can send them really fast. They're really cheap to send. There's physical cash that you can just like hand somebody. And so like the value of dollars go down over time, and so that's like a thing that you should be spending. Like, you want to spend the thing that goes down in value. And so that, like, dollars function really well as like a local currency in the United States. But as far as like US dollar status as reserve currency of the world, other nations already have started accumulating Bitcoin to hold as reserves, and I think that will only continue. And so like the US dollar can very well collapse, and the US government will only continue to persist as long as the money and capital that they have is something that is in demand to the employees that the US government will hire. So that's government officials, national agencies, the military. So like the government, like, governments aren't just these like immortal things. Like, they only last as long as the money that they have is valued by the society. And so even if like like the US dollar can continue to be around, but the form of US government could drastically change when when the game changes, and the form of money that is demanded all over the world, which right now it's dollars. Like, all over the world people demand dollars, but if that changes to be Bitcoin, and it's something that the US has no advantage of, like, because nobody has any advantage in Bitcoin, it could drastically change like the role of government, which I think is a good thing, because it'll force like right now the US dollar is it's a debt-based instrument. Like, if you put like, does anyone have like a dollar just like in their pocket or like right next to them? I don't even have any cash right here. Let me see if I can find one. Does anyone have a dollar that they can show on the camera? If not, I can pull up one on the screen.
That one right here.
All right. So have you ever read the text on the dollar? Like,
On this side?
on the front side. Well, that's even relevant too. Like, really, like, have you ever read all the text on the dollar? Like,
Not all of it. At least I don't think so.
it's pretty interesting. Here, read what it says on the side you're showing to the camera. Like, read what it says at the top.
The United States of America. This note is legal tender for all debts, public and private.
What does it say? Like,
Federal Reserve note.
and so if so that's what the dollars say now. If you look at a picture of the U.S. dollar in like the 1930s, let's see. So when you look at old dollars, they used to say silver certificate. This certifies that there is on deposit in the Treasury of the United States of America $1 in silver payable to the bearer on demand. So you used to be able to go into a bank with $1 and redeem it for gold or silver. And that's not the case anymore at all. Like, it's not even close. Like, and so dollars used to be equity based. They were a receipt for money. Whereas now when it says Federal Reserve note, it's actually debt. And so let's try to find the definition of Federal Reserve note. It's a loan. Like, by holding it, it's as if you are lending money to the government. Like, and so, like, in its current form, the U.S. dollar is a debt instrument. And what may end up happening is that if like the current trend continues and the U.S. faces like a hyperinflationary situation, where just like the monetary supply just continues to expand faster than productivity expands, then there could be a massive restructuring where the U.S. will go out of business unless they transition to an equity-based instrument. And where it has previously been, where like the old dollar was redeemable for silver, where it's backed by silver, that silver worked and gold worked. Like, the precious metals, they worked in that setting because we'll talk a little bit more. I have a whole section on why gold has been like a reserve asset, but probably what's more likely to happen over the next 100 years is that the U.S. dollar will probably start to transition into some type of Bitcoin-backed dollar, where like the U.S. government, because they have a lot of assets still, like they do have a lot of gold, they do have a lot of land, they do have a lot of like national laboratories, and like they still have assets. They're not completely broke. I mean, they have more liabilities than they have income, but they still do have a lot of assets. But what I think is likely is that there's going to be some type of Bitcoin-backed dollar, where on reserves the U.S. government will hold Bitcoin and other other cryptocurrencies too, and physical commodities, maybe public equities, so like Apple stock, maybe that's part of the U.S. reserves. But then like they may issue a currency that is either partially or fully backed by this basket of assets that they have on reserves. And so Bitcoin functions really well in that setting because it's something that's like demanded everywhere in the world, and it has a lot of the qualities like when we talk about why gold has been like a reserve asset like for all history. Like, throughout all history, people have have demanded gold, fought wars over gold, gone all over the world to find gold, go and seize, conquer lands and take the gold. And the reason why that like gold was that thing There are a couple of main reasons. One is that it's fungible, meaning that you can like melt it down or like shave off a little bit, and like the part that you shave off is like, but by cutting it up into small pieces, it doesn't change its qualities. It's still gold, and it's still like useful as gold. And so that's one big reason, which is important for like coining money, like or like creating bars of gold. So it's like easy to denominate as like a currency unit. It's identifiable. It is, has a distinct color. No other metal has it. It has a distinct sound when you cling it together. It's has a unique molecular composition, and so like it's easy to tell if it's gold. Like you don't like, in order to like accurately measure the amount, you have to like melt it down and then recast it to like measure it. But like logistically it is like easy to identify. You can look at something and like estimate like okay, this is gold and this is roughly how much it weighs, and that was like good enough for its purpose. It's impossible to counterfeit. Like there was a whole field of alchemy where people even like the smartest people in the world, like Isaac Newton, which he's one of my favorite people in all history, favorite inventors. He was trying to create gold out of other materials. And so even like the smartest people in all history. So like, he invented calculus, he invented optics, he created the gold standard. Like in response to the Bank of England collapse, he was installed as the warden of the mint, or master of the royal mint. So like, the Bank of England had a currency collapse. They had a credit collapse. Like literally they had too much debt. So it's something, like these things that we see in like our current markets today, it's like they happen every 100 years. And in response to the one at the end of the 1600s, the Bank of England collapsed, and they installed Isaac Newton as master of the mint. And he introduced what became the gold standard, which is like really what I think powered the industrial age. Was that like, people didn't have to like carry around a bunch of gold and like shave off money. Like people, like a nation or like banks could hold gold and then issue receipts to the gold that like, people could use to trade and exchange value. And so like even the smartest people on earth were trying to, make counterfeit gold. And so like, it's impossible to counterfeit. That's another reason why it was so strong. And then also like probably the most important reason why is because for something called the stock to flow ratio. So that is the ratio between the existing above ground stockpile of gold or any other asset relative to the new amount of supply that comes on, or that comes out of the ground every year. And so of all metals, gold has the highest stock to flow ratio. It's about every year, about 2%. The gold supply increases by about 2%. And when the price of gold goes up, that ratio gets smaller. Where when the price of gold goes up, it now becomes feasible to drill deeper into the earth to get gold, or it becomes feasible to take a submarine out to like go look for like shipwreck treasure in the middle of the ocean. Like but when the price of gold goes down, it decreases. And so like it's a little different than Bitcoin. That's what's really interesting about it, is that just in May, when the last halving happened, the Bitcoin stock to flow ratio, it surpassed that of gold. So previously Bitcoin had a 3.69% yearly inflation rate, but then starting in May of this year, it now has a 1.8% inflation rate. So it's now less than gold. But the difference is that like when gold increases in value, it becomes more feasible to do new types of extraction of gold. And so when the price of gold goes up, the new supply of gold also goes up at a faster rate. And when the price of gold goes down, the new supply of gold goes down, or the rate of new supply goes down. But in Bitcoin, when the price goes up, the new supply emission rate remains what it was, and it decreases regardless of price every 4 years. It cuts in half. And so Bitcoin is a really unique form of money in this sense, where, unlike copper, where copper works as pennies, but copper doesn't really work as money. Humans have been using copper throughout all history, and it's more abundant than gold. But the reason why copper wasn't the form of money, even though it's similarly easy to identify, it has a unique molecular structure. It's very fungible. You can melt it down and cut it up into coins. The reason why gold commanded a higher monetary premium is because of the stock to flow ratio. Because the new rate of copper, can always increase. There's so much copper that hasn't been extracted yet that any upward tick in the price of copper will just result in the market being flooded with copper, and then it'll go down. And so gold, since it's been sought after, for all human history, early humans were accumulating gold. And across the world, societies and civilizations that never even talked to each other were independently accumulating gold. The Incans and the Portuguese, they were all accumulating gold. They'd never spoken to each other until the Portuguese came and stole all the gold. And so up till now, pretty much all the gold that's readily available has already been found. And so it's very rare. There's never any massive influx of new gold in the market. And so that's why nations have stored gold on reserve, is because it's been a really strong reserve asset. And so how much gold is in Fort Knox? So the US government holds $236 billion of gold, 147, okay, so 4,500 metric tons of gold. And, how much gold does England have? 40,000, I don't know what 310 tons of gold. So nations stockpile gold because that's what has been in demand as this base layer of money. But now that's the big opportunities that now there's a new form of money that has burst onto the scene that has survived for 10 years so far without failure. And it has become something that is demanded all over the world. All over the world, people are accumulating Bitcoin, and the rate at which new Bitcoin comes into existence is now smaller than the rate for the asset that had served that purpose before. And so that's really why Bitcoin's in a good position to be this type of reserve asset that nations can hold, and in many cases has advantages to it. For instance, when nations are stockpiling gold, they have to physically protect. First, they have to physically acquire it. So they need to figure out how to get it from wherever it is to where they are, and then they have to physically protect it. And so that requires military forces, vast infrastructure of vaults and thick buildings in the middle of nowhere. You have to protect the gold if you're going to hold it, and so that's a really big cost, and it's a big point of failure. Whereas if nations are holding Bitcoin, Bitcoin is just data, and so the Bitcoin doesn't need to be physically stored in any one location. And so where having where gold has been like this reserve asset for humanity, and that like was part of what led to vast like military like development, because they needed like strong forces to protect their physical capital. Now that the capital is becoming digital, you know, maybe the nations of the future will invest some in like physical armed forces, but maybe invest a lot more in like digital, like IT infrastructure and security infrastructure for their data, because like, you know, the gold needs to be held physically in a single point in space and time, but Bitcoin exists as data that, you know, can be split up and, you know, needs, you know, every one of the key decision makers to like sign off in order to move the funds. And so the cost of storing and protecting that is drastically lower. And so where like, you know, throughout history, small nations that didn't have big armed forces, if they ever accumulated any gold, it would just, you know, someone with more weapons could just come and take it from them. You know, that's why the US has so much gold, is because like throughout this like multi-century, you know, fight to accumulate the gold, you know, the US emerged as the strongest armed force. And so like they're able to go and like, you know, take resources and capital from people all over the world. And then like having something like Bitcoin, which can't be physically seized, you can't kill someone to take their Bitcoin. Like you need them to sign with their private key to authorize that the Bitcoin that they have in their possession needs to be sent to an address that you have in your possession. Like, you know, people are worth more alive than dead. Just like the whole, like, it's like the chessboard has been flipped over, and it's like a new form of like, you know, three-dimensional Chinese checkers, you know, that you play when you're blindfolded, like where, you know, you used to be able to just go and like conquer land and then take their resources. But now, since there's a form of capital that can't be taken in that fashion, it's going to provide a lot of opportunity for, you know, for smaller nations to accumulate wealth, because they no longer have to physically protect it. And so that's a big reason why, you know, Bitcoin is a very strong candidate for becoming a global reserve asset, you know, held by nations all over the world, is because, you know, the bigger nation can't just come and take it from you. Like in order for the bigger nation, you know, the easiest way for that bigger nation to come and get some of your Bitcoin is for them to deliver you something that you demand. You know, you want, you know, something to be produced. Like, you know, you want meat, and maybe this other country is a strong meat producer, and so they will trade you meat for Bitcoin, you know. And so I think overall it's just going to make the world a lot more peaceful and a lot more cooperative, because, you know, you can't just go and kill someone and take their funds. And it's a form of like sovereignty and property rights that are enforced through math. Like it's not enforced through some like, you know, global like, you know, court system or like the court system of like whatever nation is like on top. It's like a form of property rights that is, you know, available to, you know, anybody on earth. And so it's that's what makes me think that like this really has something, that there's really something there, and it's a lot bigger than just like a, you know, like a speculative thing to trade. Like I really do think that Bitcoin is going to be really at the heart of society over the next you know, next millennia, really. Like, you know, there's really nothing that can shut off the Bitcoin network. And so, you know, maybe the next reserve currency on this chart is, maybe it's Bitcoin. You know, who knows? Could be. Only one way to find out. So yeah, I mean, does anyone have any questions on that topic? We kind of covered a lot of, you know, of these things, but does anyone else like anyone have anything they want to add to that, or anything that you thought was remarkable?
Brian, it's Colleen. I was, you know, when you were talking about nations being able to take the gold from each other, I mean, it's on that macro level, just bringing it down to the micro level too, right? At some point, whatever. So many people haven't been able to have whether they've been allowed to own property or even it could be taken from them. I mean, this is like on the micro level. It's just so, it's so powerful. Anyway, I don't know if I even made sense, but you got me there.
That's really at the heart of it, is that it's a form of capital that nobody really has an advantage over another person in like the securing of it.
I mean, that's ordinary.
Where like, you know, the baseline, like you need an internet connection to acquire it, maybe. Like there's some things that like this thing called Open Dime, which is like people are trying to build you know, offline forms of Bitcoin. So it's like so Open Dime is a small USB stick that allows you to spend Bitcoin like a dollar bill. You pass it along, and then like the private key is sealed within here in this like tamper evident thing. And so if you like get a you know, an untampered with one, you can like check if this still has the money on it. And so like, you know, people are trying to do that. And so like, you know, but the like, you know, so you can get Bitcoin in like an offline, like fully offline fashion, but you know, the minimum like cost is that you have to just like be able to connect to the internet. And you know, that's like a good baseline thing. Like, you know, what better way to get the whole world online? You know, like let's look up what percent of the world is on the internet. Okay, so about half the world's on the internet. You know, maybe Bitcoin is the thing that makes 100% of the world on the internet. Because, you know, like for the half of the world that's not on the internet, you know, their capital that they're accumulating and like their productivity is all in the physical world. It's not online. And so they've, you know, the threshold that would like push them over the edge to need to get on the internet just hasn't been met. But now that like, you know, potentially this form of capital is native to the internet, maybe that's what, you know, maybe that's how we like fully make the transition from the information age to the industrial age. And, you know, because like what better reason to get online than, you know, for, you know, asserting your own property rights and being able to participate in the global economy. You know, like people used to be limited by, they used to be limited by whatever was in their like nearby surroundings. Like that was the economy they could participate in. And then now, like, you know, between the internet and then like money that lives on the internet, you know, entrepreneurs who come from, you know, the lowliest of places can, you know, find a market and deliver a service, and they can get paid for it. And then they don't need to like store their funds in like some bank that's going to like run off with it, or, you know, where like a central bank can just print their amount into oblivion. You know, they know what the total supply is, and they can hold it in a way that like, if someone's going to kill them, like, yeah, someone could just come and kill them, but the person that killed them does not get their money. You know, and so it being violent, you know, like right now, like there's like really high return on investment from violently exploiting or, you know, exploiting someone for their money. But when that really shifts and like, you know, you actually have to bear the financial burden and, you know, take the risk of going and killing someone, like you really won't be able to kill that many people before you're stopped, or before you run out of energy or run out of resources, or realize like, what am I doing here? I'm not getting anything out of this. And so it's like really is like a form of like self-protection that, you know, just like lowers the cost of like asserting your rights. And so, yeah, like you're 100% right. Like it's, you know, it makes individuals like nations. You know, you can be your own nation.
Yeah, maybe that's what I was feeling too. I mean, it's really like pointing out the violence behind that is just, it's so extraordinary. I appreciate your point of view, Brian.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, this really like, you know, it's pretty funny because like a lot of people, like they first get into Bitcoin because of the price, they look at that chart and they're like, oh my gosh, look at it. And then like, once you really start understanding like what it's really all about, um, you know, and then once you learn like, the technical and mathematical reasons why it's so difficult to stop, it almost becomes inevitable, or it appears inevitable.
Inevitable, I love it.
But then like, something could happen, some disruptive thing could happen, you never know. And so like, if it was like a shoe in, like for certain this was going to happen, there wouldn't really be much price potential, because it would already be at the highest it would be, like if it was like a certain thing. And so I think that's what so much the opportunity is that like, even though it has like these qualities that put it in position to, put it in position to be like this, form of like global capital that like people all over the world like are already demanding, and then like, continue to grow and fill that role that like gold and US dollars currently have in society and, throughout all humanity. Something crazy could happen, and it's maybe something else emerges. And so like, the reason why I really, try to learn so much about this stuff is so that I can be prepared in the event that, Bitcoin is not the thing. I want to like be equipped with like the knowledge to understand like, potential disruptive things that could like, dislodge this. Right now Bitcoin's like way far in the lead, like towards this thing, because it's specifically built for that. Like other cryptocurrencies they're not built for becoming like the global reserve asset. They're built more for like payment networks, or like blockchain platforms, or like, financial contracts like lending and borrowing. They're not built like, with this in mind. Like, and so, I really try to like understand the history to see, to understand like what led to these transitions that like made, that caused like big shifts in global power, and big shifts in the form of capital that society has oriented itself around. Because, I want to be, I don't want to be left holding the bag. And, and I share that with you all because, I want good people to be the ones that can accumulate the wealth, because that's really the only way to counteract all the evil that is in the world and all the evil that we've, seen throughout history. The only way to counteract that is for good people to accumulate the wealth, so they can have the influence, they can assert their vision on the world. And so that's why this stuff is so important. And it's fun, literally. Like this is a blast to like, think about. And so.
Yay, Brian, that was amazing. Good people with our money, yes.
Yeah. So I guess there's only really kind of one more topic that I want to talk about, is like really like kind of where it fits in now. But if anyone else has anything they wanted to ask about, or like, chat about before we talk about this, by all means, can hop in and say whatever.
Hey, Brian, that was fucking amazing. Like, just beyond. The main question that I have, because you listed all the pros, right? And I mean, everything that you said, of course, I'm in the same alignment, right? Like, there just needs to be that shift in power and shift in wealth. But what is working against Bitcoin right now to not? What is stopping it from becoming that thing that is leveraged by other governments? Like, what do you foresee?
The fact that they still have so much power, they do have a lot of capacity to suppress it, or like suppress the people that use it. Like if you look at the right now there are how many total? Okay, let's just look at this one. So addresses that have more than one Bitcoin, there's only 666,000 addresses that have more than one Bitcoin. Governments have killed way more than 666,000 people. And so like they could try to do that. But there's risk involved in that, because if they were to go and kill all these people, and, so people that own more than one Bitcoin, that is in total, well, okay, let's put it this way. There's less than like there's people that have more than one Bitcoin, and there's people that have less than one Bitcoin. And in total, the people that have more than one Bitcoin have about 95% of all Bitcoin. So 95% of all Bitcoin is something around like 19 to 20 million. And so like they could like try to just like kill these people and like scare people away from it. But if it got to that point where governments were so threatened by citizens peacefully performing math, because that's what you're doing when you own Bitcoin, you're just doing a math equation. Like you're just doing math peacefully. So like if it gets to that point, like what's the purchasing power of Bitcoin going to be at that point? And at that point, maybe the people that have Bitcoin will have the means to protect themselves from the incumbents. And then also like if they were to like kill all the people with more than one Bitcoin, and like all that Bitcoin was just frozen, now the Bitcoin supply goes from 21 million down to 1 million. And what does that do for the price? And so it's kind of a double-edged sword. Like I think it's at like the transition point from when like they can really like suppress people from using it. Maybe in like 2015 or before, they would have had a better chance. But because it really was in obscurity, I think it's kind of past that point. But that's what could prevent us from seeing the benefit of it. If governments around the world just conspired to kill their peaceful math performing citizens, like governments and institutions have killed people that perform math before, like Galileo, Copernicus, like people that did math to figure out that the church was wrong and that it's the earth that goes around the sun, not the other way around. And so like, it's happened throughout history. But it's pretty difficult to do. The other things that can limit it are, if the U.S. government gets its monetary policy under control, that could reduce the need for nations to adopt Bitcoin. Right now, like when we look at these, like the money supply charts. Here, we'll look up that and we'll look up US debt clock. Actually, this is probably the main thing that could stop it would be if the world just got this big debt problem under control. Because like, why would you need to? Like, because there is like a barrier to entry with Bitcoin, like you have to, first learn about it. And because there's risk involved, like kind of what we talked about last week about just like the various risks, like the exchange rate risk, risk of you losing it. Like it's a bearer asset, meaning like if you control the private keys, you control it. And like, some people might lose it, or, how funny would that be if like a nation accumulated a bunch of Bitcoin and the person they put in charge of the private key, like got a virus in their computer from going to a website they shouldn't have. And then it just poof gone. Like, like things like that could happen. So, there's kind of like, that performance risk. It's greater on this, like for an individual, like you can hold your Bitcoin just fine. But if you're a nation, or, if you're the employee at whatever nation that you live in that is put to the task of holding the Bitcoin on behalf of the nation, there's pretty big performance risk there. And so, some nations just may not be competent to do it. But like that really just means greater upside potential for the nations that have the competence to navigate this arena. And so like, one person's loss is another person's gain in this. And so, that could be another reason why like it's harder for nations to adopt it. Or just like, what we were talking about last week, like the exchange rate risk. If the demand for Bitcoin just goes away, why would they hold it as an asset? And so the longer that Bitcoin goes without going to zero, and the longer that it goes, where let's look at the longer that it goes, look at the, can you guys see the chart?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm going to plot the 200-day moving average of Bitcoin. So this is like a long-term average. It's useful to plot it because it gets rid of the daily volatility. So 200 day. How many months is 200 day? I'm just gonna do the yearly average. So I'm gonna do the 12-month. So this is the monthly chart. So here I'm gonna just do the yearly moving average. And we can even get rid of all the other stuff. Like let's only look at this. So like, that's the yearly moving average. Let's look at the another moving average that's good to look at is the 4-year moving average, because that's like the mining cycle goes in 4 years. So let's pull up the 4-year moving average as well. Not 4 months, 36. No, 48. Can't do math today. So as these moving averages continue to trend up, every day that Bitcoin doesn't go to zero is more proof that it's not going to go to zero. And so because Bitcoin, only started 10 years ago, that's something that could slow down adoption. But if it continues along this trend and it continues delivering performance result, if it continues to appreciate relative to other assets, then that's what, then it'll be easier for other, for nations to form around it. But also maybe that's going to be when you look at the map of the world from 200 years ago to the map of the world today, the borders are always changing. New nations are forming, old nations are going by the wayside. And maybe the next crop of nations aren't the current crop. Maybe the current crop of nations can't accumulate it or won't accumulate it because it disrupts their business model. And then the people that end up with the Bitcoin, might organize and create new nations because they have the capital. They can deploy it. If they need an armed force, and they have the thing that's in high demand, they're going to be able to find people who are, maybe the same type of people that join the military today. They will be willing to, join, whatever the future of militaries look like. Where it's rather than land, oil, and gold are the assets that are protected. It's land, nuclear production facilities, and Bitcoin. And so, that could be what holds it back, but it's also the opportunity for new nations to form. But yeah, that's a good question. It's something to think about. I'll keep thinking on that. I'll try to go into more, because I pretty much said, yeah, it's going to happen anyways. But yeah, so I'll keep thinking on that question. And that.
No, that was a great answer, but it's always good to just see what those potentials are, right? So that there's a counter move to that. Thank you.
Or another cryptocurrency, maybe Hex. Would that be great? Well,
I would love that personally, because there's a lot more in Hex than.
Yeah, and it could be, or maybe it some combination of them. I don't think that only one cryptocurrency will emerge, because they all have different use cases and different reasons to use them. But it could be disrupted by that. Or I guess what I didn't show, if this gets under control, national debt, money supply, currency and credit derivatives, when this, if this was to be under control, that could drastically reduce the demand for Bitcoin, because, why would you need to adopt something new if the problem has solved itself? So yeah, that could be it. And the interesting thing to look at that really terrifies me is when you look at the U.S. total national assets and compare that to the U.S. unfunded liabilities. And so just a few weeks ago, the total unfunded liabilities surpassed the total national assets. So total national assets, that is defined, let me zoom out so I can read the description. The site has literally the worst UI. Total national assets include personal assets, non-incorporated assets, corporation assets, and non-profit organization assets. So the U.S. unfunded liabilities, which include Social Security, Medicare Parts A, B, and D, federal debt held by the public, plus federal employee and veteran benefits, that has surpassed the total national assets. So the amount, and what's different about, so the unfunded liabilities, that is money that people are expecting. But the reason why it's not counted in this U.S. national debt figure is because the U.S. national debt only includes money that has already been lent into existence. So when new money is created, it's not just printed. Printing is like, it's easy to kind of grasp printing, but it's really being lent into existence. The Federal Reserve lends it to the Treasury. They draw from an account that literally, they write a check. Like someone at the Federal Reserve will write a check that comes from an account with a zero balance. You know, they'll write a $3 trillion check from an account with a zero balance. And like, that's like what the national debt, that's where the national debt comes from. And so that's money that already has been lent into existence that is owed back to the Federal Reserve or other places that lend money to the government, other nations, bondholders, et cetera. That's different than unfunded liabilities because this is money that people are promised, like from Social Security or like Medicare or like, what their, federal employee and veteran benefits claim to deliver to them. But this money doesn't exist yet. So this is money that's owed that doesn't exist. And the only way that it will exist is for it to be lent into existence. So so the real U.S. national debt is about $178 trillion. But the U.S. national debt that's shown to the world, it's 26 trillion, up from, I don't even know what it was. I think this site shows a timeline. Debt clock time machine. Here we go. So we look at 1980, U.S. national debt was not even $1 trillion. Let's look at year 2000, national debt, 5 trillion. 2008, 10 trillion. 2016, 19 trillion. And now, so throughout Trump's time, 26 trillion. So Trump has taken the national debt from, 26 over 19. The national debt has increased 36% under Trump. Which is, right in line, like, he's a famous debtor. Like, he built his empire on debt and funny money loans. Like, that's like, it's pretty shocking. People thinking that something was going to change there. Like, not at all. And then he's actually the one who's introducing UBI, like that $1,200 stimulus check. That was not the end of that. Like, him and Mnuchin have already talked about, sending out debit cards with Trump's face on it to, just so they can more easily deposit funds to people. Right now, did you hear what I saw today? Stimulus sent to dead people.
I saw that too.
More than $1.4 billion of checks were sent to dead people. Like, they're trying to solve this problem by sending out Trump debit cards. And, you know, people thought that Andrew Yang was the one that was going to like pioneer that, but no, it's going to be Trump. And, you know, I bought Bitcoin with my stimulus, that's for sure. And, you know, as they send out the stimulus and it continues to deteriorate people's purchasing power on top of the other money printing, like, you know, people are going to wise up. And so, yeah, I mean, that's that if this trend stops of national debt, you know, money supply and the currency and credit derivatives, which like we'll have to talk about on a whole other day. Like when I talk about money supply, I don't even talk about this one. I talk about MZM, which is like physical cash, savings accounts, checking accounts, and money market accounts. It's like meant to be like the liquid cash. I don't even consider the M2 money supply. And I don't even consider like credit and currency derivatives. Like, you know, so the real money supply is somewhere closer to $685 trillion. Like what percent of that do you own? Like, you know, even millionaires, like what is 1 million, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. I lose count. So 1 million divided by 1 trillion. It's going to be like 10 to the minus 6. So millionaires have so we do the to percent. Millionaires have 0.0001% of the money supply. Like that, you know, that's nothing. And so, you know, this may never end. And yeah, so it's always, you all should look at it. This is one of my favorite websites, usdebtclock.org. I'll share this here in the chat.
It's insane looking.
Yeah. But all is well, right? We have our TikTok videos. We've got our sports on TV. We've got, you know, all the bread and circus that we could consume ourselves with. Yet we persist. What else can you do? Yeah, great question, Emma. That really thought provoking.
Yeah, I mean, you know my stance on it. Well, you see my Instagram page. I'm all for exposing all of this. Also, my team wants to clip that part where you were like, "Is the government going to kill people for peacefully doing that?" Like, we're going to clip that and repost that on our pages.
Yes,
I'm
please.
asking your permission now.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, feel free. Anything, you know, anything you can take from this and circulate it widely. Yeah, I mean, but you know, like maybe that's what Bitcoin needs to be like to become that thing, is like, you know, big population of martyrs, right? Like how many Catholic Church martyrs, like they have saints. The requirement to be a saint is that you had to be a martyr, right? Like these people, you know, like these churches that are, you know, kind of have been losing their power. They used to have a lot of power. Now they have less power. But maybe part of what made their story and their narrative so compelling, like, you know, maybe the reason why like people, you know, even when they like looked at it for what it was, they're like, I don't know, this sounds like a pagan ghost story. But they like latched onto it was because like, they're like, okay, well, these people died for this, so it must be real. Like, you know, so far there really haven't been any martyrs in Bitcoin. You know, Satoshi disappeared. He probably died of it. Like the person who it probably was, or like the person who was like writing the first version of the Bitcoin code, like he wasn't killed. Like, you know, like Muammar Gaddafi, he was a martyr, but then like his thing didn't take off because like, you know, war on terrorism, ISIS, all that, like, you know, that narrative outperformed the narrative of the Pan-African currency. And, you know, so that the narrative of like anti-terrorism won out against that. But, and like, you know, the narrative that like allowed these organized religions to win out for so long, like part of it is, you know, entertainment value. like it's fun to hear these stories, and it's fun to like go to a place and then have someone talk to you, literally like what I'm doing now. Like it's fun, like for all of us. Like, there's entertainment value in like, religious institutions. And I think there's like some type of like genetic value where like it brought people together. And so it like increased genetic diversity, and that helped to, make, help humans live longer and be healthier. And so like, there's kind of like a self-perpetuating cycle. But like, martyrs in any type of like institution, like, people that go and die in a war, they're honored, and that like helps give credibility to the cause that they were fighting for. And so, I don't want to be a martyr. I plan on living till, the last Bitcoin is mined, 32 times. So let's look up when the last year Bitcoin will be mined. It's going to be like something like 2020. Okay, 2140. It's actually going to be sooner than this. But, I plan on living to be about 150 years old. Like, I don't want to be a martyr. But, and I don't think I have enough Bitcoin to be a martyr in this sense. So maybe
not right now at least, but maybe in the future somebody might gift you a whole bunch. But actually, so then I would have a follow-up question to that I do not want you to answer tonight. Maybe we'll save it for next week, because I don't want to sidetrack you.
Yeah.
But like, then what would be the solution instead of us all being martyrs, right? What would be the solution to that? How can we bring it to the public and get it to tip those of us that hold a certain amount or have a network that have a certain amount, and that we are converting our dollars and what we make in our businesses and the revenue that we generate, because we don't use a lot of cash on day to day, which that's a whole other story in itself. But for those of us that are converting our USD into Bitcoin and just holding on to it, how do we, what do we put in place to just keep making this shift? But like I said, I don't necessarily want that for like tonight to go into details. Maybe that's just a topic.
Great question. I mean, leading by example, putting out good humanity, being productive, like, delivering things that help people, like, gaining skills that make you more useful, learning things that make you more persuasive and influential, and, living peacefully, like the difference between this revolution and revolutions in the past is that like the ones that had to win, they actually had to assert some level of violence. This is actually a very peaceful revolution. Like not a scene, like, I mean, like some people may have died like from being like, I can't even think of a single time someone's died in something related to Bitcoin. Like, and so like, that's one way, because like, it's easy to motivate a population to go and like take action against people when it's like kind of like a really like, like gut wrenching topic. Like, you can convince a lot of people that like, oh, these crazy terrorists who speak this funny language and read from right to left, like they're different, they're evil. Like you can actually motivate a lot of people to do that. But like what's different about this is that like, what are they gonna say? Oh, these people that get online and do math and, hang out and, live a simple life because they realize the opportunity cost of living like a life of vanity. Like there's really not much that you can there's nothing that's like really gut wrenching about like Bitcoin and the people that are drawn to Bitcoin that could cause, that would allow like a government to persuade their like all their citizens to like go after these people. Like, they'll be like, wait, I don't want to go after them. I want to be part of that. And so I think that like, getting good people into the space and, finding strength within that and, teaching each other and, like that's probably the best way to like form the seed of like a new society, is to like take the things that we liked from the old society, and get rid of the things that we don't like from the old society, and then just assert that as like the new culture that we create in around this like new form of money. And so yeah, that's probably but I'll keep thinking on that one too. That's a that's an ongoing question. That's something that will always be part of like what this is all about, is like who are the people that you bring in, and how do you communicate to people so that like people are on the same page, and that like they're doing things that like help embolden like this new society that we're creating here. Yeah, thank you so much, Emma. That's again a really thought-provoking question. We'll definitely continue more on. Yeah, I guess literally like the last topic that maybe we could touch on is like kind of what it's at now. Like we covered a lot of history here, but kind of what's like more relevant today is like where it's at now. Like so like part of the reason why like Bitcoin's so strong, like the reason why it like can't be shut down right now is because throughout the first like about 7 years of its existence, it really operated in obscurity. Like it started as like this, kind of like weird like math experiment with these like, within this like very niche area of like cryptography experts. And so it started as like an experiment, operated in obscurity. Its first major use case was to power it was meant to be a like free speech market where people could sell whatever they want. It quickly turned into a drug market. And, so like it was like widely circulated because it was used by people that had really short time horizons. Like at that time when the Silk Road existed and the only use of Bitcoin, like people weren't investing in Bitcoin, they were only buying it so that they could, buy some illicit substance from someone on the internet. Like because it like circulated so much of that early supply throughout people that had very short time horizons, like people who are selling drugs online, they're not thinking of the future too far. They're thinking about like getting their next quick buck. And people who are like consuming drugs that they're buying online, they're not really thinking about the future either. They're thinking about the present. Like they're looking for that quick moment of euphoria. And so like so much that early supply was just widely circulated. And so like it's kind of like gold in that sense, where like because like societies had like been trying to accumulate gold for so long, the gold supply was just widely circulated all across the world. And so that's part of what enabled it to like last for so long as like a form of money that's used all over. And so like the first couple of years, that's something that really can't be replicated now. Like in Hex's first couple months, the price performance has way outperformed Bitcoin's in the first couple months. But Hex really wasn't. I mean, even though Hex kind of is in its own like obscure part of the cryptosphere, it's like there's a lot of opposition to Hex, a lot of misunderstanding, and like just people don't really know about it. Like it already kind of like it didn't have a lot of time to kind of like establish itself before like the rest of the world kind of caught on. And so like that's something that's like unique to Bitcoin because it was like the first like major cryptocurrency that that existed, is that like it had a couple years to just like operate in complete obscurity before anyone else kind of caught on. So it was able to kind of like get its feet under itself before like there could be any like before it could register on any like major government's radar. In the early days, like it very well could have been shut down. But because it became so distributed, it is just harder and harder to do every day. And so like if that hadn't happened, it may not be in a position to like really be a part of like the geopolitical stage, because maybe one person would own too much of it, or and that creates the risk of them like tanking the price at any time, or maybe the government would have accumulated all of it. That could have happened. They could have shut it down by just accumulating all of it, and then burning the keys. And like then it would, the like it doesn't really matter what the total supply is. I personally think the total supply of Bitcoin should be 1, and you just think about your percentage of 1. But like the governments could have done something like that, but they kind of lost that chance. It's like too ingrained in society now. And like different governments have had different approaches to it. When the Silk Road, when the founder of the Silk Road, his name was Ross Ulbricht, he was arrested in San Francisco for running the Silk Road drug market. He was actually arrested not for running the site, but because he actually was like paying people to like, he was hiring hitmen. The hitmen actually scammed him. They didn't actually kill anybody. He like paid for a couple people to be killed, and the hitmen just took his money and didn't do it. And so he was like arrested for things not related to Bitcoin, but for just like other crimes, and he's in jail for life. And when they arrested him, they the FBI agents who went in to get him, they actually knew what type of laptop he had, and so they made sure to have that type of charger, and they staged a fight in a library so that he like looked away from his computer, and they went and snatched him and kept his computer open, because if he would have been able to shut his computer, they probably wouldn't have been able to unlock it, and the Bitcoin would have stayed with him, and he probably wouldn't have given it up. Like he wouldn't have allowed them to take the Bitcoin. But because he left his computer open, the FBI was able to seize the Bitcoin. Let's look up Silk Road Bitcoin. So they seized what's the real number? Okay, so they seized 144,000 Bitcoin. So 144,000 times price today is 9,500. The U.S. government had $1.37 billion of Bitcoin at one point. And rather than holding that Bitcoin, they sold it to some Silicon Valley VC, Tim Draper. He bought the Bitcoin that was put up for the auction. Okay, so they actually, maybe they didn't seize 144K. Okay, so maybe they didn't seize that much. So they auctioned off about 30,000 Bitcoin. So this is Bitcoin the U.S. government had in their possession, and then they sold. Let's see the price that he paid. So Tim Draper, he, let's see the auction. Does it say here? Tim Draper auction price. Okay, so he paid 19 million for 30,000 Bitcoin. So 19, 123 over 30, 123. So Tim Draper paid, let's look at where's the chart? Bring this back. Tim Draper paid $600 per Bitcoin. So the US government sold that Bitcoin at, within this bear market, like 50% down from the all-time high, or, at the time. Like, why do they do that? Like, how dumb are they? Like, it's baffling. And so like, the US government has been in possession of a lot of Bitcoin. And even there's even another Bitcoin auction coming up. Bitcoin auction, US Marshals. So even still, okay, so 4,000 Bitcoin for sale. So like, so governments can like for the person that they're prosecuting, usually like you can be held in contempt of court. So this is actually how governments can take your Bitcoin. Is it like they can hold you, like if they think that you could give up the private keys to the Bitcoin, they could hold you in jail. Some people have been held in jail and they're like, I'm never giving this up. And usually it takes like whatever judge made that order to like retire or die. And then a new judge might like take another look at it and they're like, okay, then this has happened where people have been held in contempt of court. And they, don't give up the funds that like the court originally thought they could have access to. So some people like, usually it takes like another judge, like, and like an appeal, like in front of a new judge. But like, the US government has been able to seize Bitcoin. Usually like sometimes criminals, they just don't store them very effectively. So like if they steal their iPhone and they unlock their iPhone and they like hold it on their iPhone, they can take it. But like so far, like these are for like, real criminals, or they had to have warrants and there's like due process of law. Could change. They could start trying to seize Bitcoin outside of this. But regardless of how they got it, it's like, they regularly get Bitcoin and then they sell it. So here they're selling, like they're selling, they're auctioning off, 4,000 Bitcoin. So I don't know what the total number of Bitcoins sold by the US government, but the US government is not very like, why are they selling it when they can print their own money? Like, what are they selling the Bitcoin for? Like, come on. Like, that makes me really bearish on like, just like the US in general, is that like time and time again, they have the opportunity to accumulate Bitcoin, but they don't. Like look at what Trump says about it. I'm not a fan of Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies, which are not money and whose value is highly volatile and based on thin air. Unregulated crypto assets can facilitate unlawful behavior, including drug trade and other illegal activity. So like from this, which are not money. So he's wrong about that. It is money.
Because the dollar doesn't have drug trade, right? Or illegal activity.
Yeah. Like, right about it being highly volatile. But that's like one of the benefits. Like we talk about that, like literally every week we talk about how the volatility in Bitcoin is the source of opportunity. Like that's what can empower people to lift themselves up from whatever their situation is that there's always opportunity. There's not someone artificially inflating the price that like keeps poor people from having an opportunity to get in at a good price. Like, so yes, he's right about it being volatile, but based on thin air, like not at all. This is based on SHA 256 math. Like it's, like when I talk about like the Bitcoin miners are rolling the 2 to the 256 sided die, like that's like the hardest math in the world. And so like there's a video I'm gonna share for y'all to watch that really like describes like, how secure this is. And so like, like this is the president of the United States just being so wrong on Bitcoin when the information is out there. Like there's so many people out there, giving away free information about this topic. And like, so like just time and time again, the US government just really like proves that it's like, maybe isn't equipped to be the leader as we move from the industrial age into the information age. Like the things that they have, like maybe aren't going to be in high demand, and they're getting rid of the thing that could be in high demand over time. And so like that to me is always pretty funny to think about, that like the US could have had like a stronghold in the Bitcoin market, but they sell it to some San Francisco VC. Come on. Whereas like Bulgaria, when they seize Bitcoin from criminals, they keep it. Like, you know, they're smarter. Like that's, and they've had massive return on investment from that. You know, like they don't sell it. They don't have auctions. They keep it. You know, so you know, like Bulgaria has a lot of Bitcoin, and what's pretty interesting is that, and what really proves that like there's something here, is that all the nations they're under sanctions from the United States just happen to also like, you know, be accumulating Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies, and that's because they're left out of this like, you know, global debt casino that the U.S. runs. You know, like they're monetary sanctions on these countries. They have to find other solutions, and Bitcoin has emerged as a solution that like they didn't have to create, like, you know, but they're able to use it because it, like, you know, a nation can put a sanction on other people for being a different color or speaking a different language, or like, you know, having different beliefs, or having resources that interfere with their monopoly on, you know, how those resources are traded. You know, like, you know, they could put sanctions, like monetary sanctions. There's like Bitcoin is, it's censorship resistant. Like nobody can assert that like another person can't participate in the network. And so the nations that have started to accumulate are the nations that are just left out of the other, you know, left out of the rest of the world's economy from sanctions. And so maybe that's what, you know, maybe the tables will have turned. We're like, you know, by trying to oppress nations that are a perceived threat, we really just force them into something that will give them more leverage over the United States in the future. You know, like Russia, they have a lot of crypto. Like Vitalik Buterin, founder of Ethereum, he is from Russia, even though he's not really like a allegiant to Russia. You know, all these crypto people are like pretty, like, you know, not anti-government. Some are anti-government. Some are just like government irreverent. That's kind of where he fits in. But like, you know, Putin is fully tuned into this stuff, you know, because like they're left out of like, you know, because of all the sanctions under Russia. Russia's actually in a really good position because they don't have much debt because they weren't able to take out the debt. They have a lot of gold, and they have the capacity to produce oil really cheap. And add Bitcoin to that equation, like, you know, maybe Russia emerges as like a global superpower in the next century. You know, another example is Venezuela. Venezuela has been under like complete currency collapse for the last couple of years, like hyperinflation, where they run out of ink to print more bills, and they just tell people to add zeros to all their notes, like all their bills. They don't print more. They just tell them add a zero. That 100 Bolivar note, now it's 1,000. You're rich. There you are. Like they just do that. And so Venezuela actually tried to launch their own cryptocurrency. That didn't really work. But some that they did, like recently, a lot of people in Venezuela were mining Bitcoin because they have very cheap power, but like they're literally like their currency is collapsing. So people, like, there's really high demand for Bitcoin in Venezuela. So a lot of people were importing mining hardware and doing Bitcoin mining, and Maduro seized a lot of the mining equipment. And so Venezuela is starting to enter the mining ecosystem. And what that is like, and same with Iran. Iran actually has 3% of all mining, like in the world. Iran's a tiny nation, but because they have so much power capacity, like from their oil, they've actually started turning uranium enrichment facilities into Bitcoin mine facilities. Because like, you know, the uranium enrichment, like while that was a profitable business for them, it put a big target on their back, and it's difficult to do. Whereas like, you know, they're now like a big player in the mining ecosystem. And like specifically with nations that produce oil, and by, you know, the rules of OPEC, they are unable to, like what OPEC means is it puts restrictions on countries that produce oil and forces them to export it in exchange for dollars. So like, and then because these countries are under like all these sanctions, they like, it's very difficult for them to export their oil. So they either have to smuggle it or sell it to nations that like are willing to like pay for black market oil. But now, like, these nations that used to have a hard time selling their oil, they can now just like use their oil to run mining equipment and then get a form of capital that can't be censored through sanctions. And so these oil producing nations, like Venezuela and Iran in particular, because I know that they're like already in this game. The others are probably getting into it too. This could drastically change the whole, just like the role of like oil in society, where like, so much of like the US military might is focused on maintaining the oil export markets to be how they are. Now these places don't even need to export their oil. Now that there's like, new renewable energies coming on the market and they're becoming more and more cheap, and these places have a lot of oil and it's hard for them to export. Now they can just create power with that oil, and they're in business. They can do mining. And so, big shift in that sense is on the horizon. China does a lot of mining too. That's because they have the advantages China has is they have all the chip manufacturing, like for the Bitcoin miners. So when we look at like the top of the line Bitcoin mining equipment, this is the English site, but this is a Chinese company, like Antminer. Let's see. We'll go back to English so we can, it's a Chinese company, but like, the people that have an advantage in mining are the people that can either produce the mining equipment at low costs, or the people that can produce power at low costs. And between because like all the electronics are produced in China, the US produces almost no electronics. US is already at a disadvantage in this space. And then the China River Hydroelectric, I forgot what it's called. I always forget how to pronounce it. Yangtze River. So because they have this river where so much hydroelectric power is created, they have a big mining advantage. So a lot of the mining is in China. And then also the other nation where a lot of the mining exists is in Iceland. And that's because they have geothermal power. And it's really cold there, so it's easy to cool the equipment. So like a lot of nations are deeply, deeply invested in this. Some by, they had no choice because, they had sanctions. Other just because of, natural phenomena, like China with their hydroelectric power from their massive river, and Iceland because of the geothermal power. Like some nations just have an advantage, and the US just doesn't have that advantage, and no amount of military might gives them that advantage. So like, where nations have not been able to emerge as like leaders in the world because of just like natural disadvantages, there's like a new form of capital that, and just circumstance, from like, the sanctions on these countries has decimated them for decades. But now those sanctions might be what puts them in position to, be leaders in this new economy. And so whether it's like a natural thing like the geothermal power or the hydroelectric, or if it's like government imposed sanctions, like it doesn't matter why these people get into Bitcoin earlier than others, but they are, and maybe some of these nations that a lot of Americans have been indoctrinated to have a lot of hatred for, which is really racism. Like, there's like global racism where we think it's okay to impose sanctions that cause people to starve to death in other nations. Like, That's dangerous. That's a dangerous mentality, and all to just support, like the current, like the monetary status quo. And maybe now these nations are going to have this new form of power and new form of influence on the world. And the wealth transfer has got to come from somewhere. And we have Trump, expressing opposition. And countries like India is always banning it. Some countries are getting it left out. And what really opened my mind to this like whole concept of like the importance of like nations, where nations can have a lot of wealth and then it can suddenly disappear. The Coinage Act of 1873. So let me find the article that I'm looking for. So the Coinage Act was, it was a law that made it so that like silver, like here, it ended, it like put the nation on the gold standard. Like it used to be, it was like a gold and silver standard, but then it became the gold standard purely by law. Like the US passed a law saying that silver was no longer legal tender as dollar coins, and only gold was, redeemable from US dollars. And so what happened during this time is that, silver was no longer, taken as legal currency, and there was like a trade-in window. So like, let's see if it says here. We can quickly find it. I think it was like a couple months window where you could trade in, or like exchange. I don't know how long it was. I'll have to look and get back to you on that. But like, there was a period of time where you could exchange your silver for, new dollars, but they allowed a 6-month window during which you could be redeemed for other currency, provided that they had not been chop marked by Asian merchants. So when silver coins were used in Asia, so like between China and India, they they would chop mark them. So it was just like a way to like mark them, just to like for accounting, like, and so all the silver coins that were being circulated through the Asian economies were not allowed to be traded in for the new gold-backed currency. And so in this time, China and India and other Asian countries lost like 80% of their national wealth because, they had a lot of silver. They were very productive economies, but it was illegal for them to trade in their currency that they had because it was chop marked. And so like these nations were left holding the silver bag when the world moved away from silver to gold as the sole like monetary metal. And that massively decimated their economies for a century, like, for over a century. Like they're still recovering from this. And so like nations that are holding the US dollar on reserve, if like, the world like transitions into like this new economy where like the reserve asset that is in demand is now Bitcoin and is not in dollars, it doesn't matter why the new demand shifts. Like in history, we see that, this was shifted, through a law where they didn't allow the coins that were held by the Asian countries to be exchanged for the new currency. That was a big decrease in demand for silver, by law, like, that the world was aligned with, So like, it doesn't matter why the demand shifts from one form of money to the other. But if you're left holding the bag of the thing that people no longer demand, then your purchasing power can just go to zero. And so like, we've seen it in history, like, recently that things like that have happened. And so that to me, I think is like the biggest risk of like, of the US dollar system, is that there's now other things that are in demand, and that demand can quickly shift. And if like, the dollars that the government has to be able to pay for things like the military, if like the people that are actually in the military no longer accept that, and they've seen like so much, everything just go to shit, and they just have no trust in their government because like, maybe they're mad about how they handle a pandemic, or maybe they realize that there's systemic racism in these institutions, and like that feeling of patriotism that might make up for like the decreasing value of the currency they're getting paid in, as soon as it hits that threshold where they're no longer willing to accept that, to go and fight on behalf of the wealthy people who like are in control, that could be a big hit to the national wealth of the United States. And so like that's why I'm so frantic about accumulating Bitcoin, because I plan on living to be 170 years old, and if we have more Bitcoin than the people that have the resources now, when this kind of big crack up boom happens, like that's the opportunity. That's the real dip that we want to catch, is when the global power shifts, and there's opportunity to accumulate these assets and resources and facilities, and now we can assert our will in the world. Like that's the opportunity we're looking for. And you're not going to get that by accumulating more dollars. Like that's not the thing that's going to unlock that for you. And so far, the thing that appears to be that is Bitcoin. And so that's definitely why I'm so frantic about it, because there's big opportunity on the horizon. Like big shift in power might be scary, but within that's just entrepreneurial opportunity. If people can no longer get these necessary goods and services from their government, because their government only has a worthless currency to wield, then that's opportunity for new entrepreneurs to come in and deliver that service. And like, that's the big opportunity that's on the horizon. And, you never know when it's going to happen, but, could be in our lifetime. And, that's a big opportunity for us. All right. that was all that we, I had planned on chatting about. It's been about 2 hours.
You're amazing, Brian. You really, your information this is so great. So amazing.
I can't wait to put this up on YouTube and rewatch it. But is there anything else you wanted to ask about, talk about?
I unmuted already, my bad. Yeah, I mean, you just went into mining, and so we can go into a whole bunch of stuff about that. Yeah, because I had a mining operation too, and I kind of closed it down, just looking for more, I guess, sustainable ways to do it, and like energy efficient ways.
Oh wow!
Say it again.
Where were you mining? Like just in your house?
No, Pennsylvania. We just had a warehouse. And just to be fair, I was just like, as I always am, like the backer and the investor. I'm not like, I wasn't the brains in the operation with like putting all the things together. But a couple of things happened, and then like we were just doing the ICO thing, and so we had, and then something happened where the rigs that we had kind of just became outdated, and we just didn't want to swap the machines, and there was a back order, so it was just easier to just shut it down and just start trading. But now, like I'm in Puerto Rico now, and we were actually heading down to South America because we specifically were looking at Venezuela to open something up. I also have family in Guyana, which is very close, and just to be able to put something up there, it might just be easier. So yeah, I mean, it might be a whole other topic, but I'm very interested in mining as well.
You definitely like highlighted like the risk of mining. is that like, you know, the equipment can become outdated because like there's always new innovations and like, you know, new waves of equipment come in and then old ones kind of fall by the wayside. And like, you know, the main driver in that is just like the cost of power. And so I imagine Pennsylvania, because there's so, like, I imagine that's a cheap place to produce, to do mining. Other places that are popular in the U.S. are Wyoming, Montana, Washington State, Texas has become one, and there's actually like a lot of like, because it's become so competitive, the mining, it's really like I think the age of people mining like on their own is starting to kind of fall by the wayside. And so like a lot of the mining is starting to concentrate in these like mining facilities. So, you know, maybe like the one that you had there, or like these like data centers where a lot of people will put their mining equipment, like they'll send their miners to the data center and they'll just run it for you and they'll sell you power usually at the industrial like rate. Like commercial average rate is like 12 cents per kilowatt hour, but like industrial rate is usually somewhere around like 7 or 8, which is like more profitable. Like you can probably mine at 7 or 8 cents per kilowatt hour. And so a lot of the mining has started to move out of people's homes and into like shared facilities. And a lot of them, they supplement the power from the grid with renewable energy. So like, you know, one big category is like power that would otherwise go to waste. Well, so on the renewable topic, like, you know, like wind energy, which like sometimes isn't very profitable to sell to the grid, but can help lower the price of power so you can mine more profitably. So like some wind power is being used for that. Some solar, where like, you know, selling to the grid isn't as profitable as mining, is another use case. And also like energy that would otherwise be wasted, like at oil refinery or like oil extraction facilities. A byproduct is natural gas. And sometimes the cost of transporting the natural gas to where it can be sold is greater than the amount of money you get from selling it. And so there's a company, they sell something called so this company actually sells these units to like oil production facilities, because they usually just like burn, like, so when you look at pictures of like, you know, Saudi Arabia oil field, at night. So you see these, okay, so those are bombs. So that's not what I'm looking for. Okay, this is a good example. You see on here how you see this flame. This is natural gas that is otherwise like just like it's literally going to waste. Like they can't store it, they can't pipe it out because it's just too expensive to do that for what it's worth. And so they just burn it. It's just a byproduct of extracting oil. And so what this company Ohm does is they sell these natural gas generators that power these like modular mining facilities. So inside of these units, they have a bunch of miners, and they use that to, you know, to like capture energy that was otherwise going to waste, so that they can like just make more money. And so like anywhere where there's power that is either going to waste or is actually being, like, there's this whole concept of negative cost power. It's where like the energy producer like gives it away. They actually pay you to take the power and use it. I think in New York, there's one of the power providers has started mining, because at times where there's like low demand from the grid, some power just goes to waste. And so Bitcoin mining is a way to capture energy that would otherwise go to waste and monetize it. And so like, you know, it's starting at that, but like we could end up in a scenario where like the people that produce the power, they'll have a business decision to make. are they going to sell the power to the grid, so people can watch Netflix, or are they going to mine with that power? And so probably like over the next 12 to 16 years, the mining is like, really going to become nationalized, where like only people that can produce power are going to be able to do the mining. It's going to be so competitive as like the inflation rate continues to cut in half. And like more people are like trying to accumulate this form of capital, where, like it may cause a situation where just like like you no longer rely on like a single like central power supplier, where like people like in their like small communities will need to generate their own power because the people that would otherwise be selling it to them now have a more profitable use for that energy. And so like, it could lead to big shifts in the like energy markets, because now like, you used to have to sell the power to someone who would use it. Now you can take in as much power as you can possibly get and turn it into Bitcoin. So that's like a big shift.